Hi, I'm Jeremy. I'm a dork living in Portland, Oregon who spent too many years listening to podcasts and not doing anything creative. This is my attempt to rectify that, to create and contribute something where I talk to people about their cultural obsessions and try to give some recommendations of my own. Welcome to Giving the Mic to the Wrong Person. Rough flow for the show, and rough flow is putting it mildly. But I figure start by the usual introduction. Actually, at one point.
What do you have for an introduction?
Hi, everybody. You are listening to Giving the Mic to the Wrong Person. I am your host, Jeremy. Joining us tonight, returning and new guests. To my right, I want to introduce our returning guests. Returning guests, if you could please introduce yourself.
I'm Jacob.
All right, Jacob back. Other returning co-host.
I'm Garrett. I'm also to his right.
All right.
Behind Jacob.
And new guest for this evening, could you please introduce yourself to the viewing audience?
I'm stuck in the middle, and my name is Arun.
All right, and thank you very much. That's the intro.
Okay.
I'm kind of curious like how you went from cooking school to covering like right-wing assholes and hooking up with Greenwald's group.
Is that what your degree says, cooking school?
My highest degree is a culinary school degree.
Mm-hmm.
Mainly because I managed to drop out of both a bachelor's and a master's program in college because I took a job in journalism in New York in the early 90s. And then I went to cooking school in the late 90s.
Gotcha.
And so it's more of an interregnum between two epochs of journalism.
For lack of better transition, thank you for joining us, Arun, from the, I was going to say, the more wintry climes on the East Coast right about now, isn't it?
Yep. It's been cold and snowy, but I like that.
So, can you give us and the viewing audience just like a little bit of your background?
I am a journalist. I got my start in the early 90s. I worked as an editor at this left-wing news weekly called The Guardian News Weekly. It has nothing to do with the what in those days we would just call the Manchester Guardian. Mm-hmm. The Guardian was founded by three journalists who had served on General Eisenhower's staff. They were part of the denazification effort in Germany. That's how they met. Their job was basically to go from town to town in Germany, fire the staff of the newspapers under the assumption that they were Nazis, and then find anyone they could to replace them. And these three guys would try and find like whatever left-wingers they could find, socialists, communists, anarchists, to be the new newspaper staff. They then went back about a year and a half later to check on the progress, and in most of the places they went to, the Nazis were back in charge of the newspapers. And this was also a time of rising anti-communist hysteria in the United States, so they decided they wanted to start a publication that would be sympathetic to but independent of the Communist Party, and it would also be a guard against fascism. So it was explicitly founded as an anti-fascist publication, which is interesting enough in this day and age in 1948. It was the largest left-wing publication in the 1950s, much bigger than the Nation or other publications. The way I like to explain significance, the reason people know about the Rosenbergs is because of The Guardian. They had been completely abandoned by the Communist Party. There was no campaign to save them. They were completely being ignored, and it was The Guardian who took it up as a campaign. And so they're the ones who led the opposition to their execution, and their circulation peaked right about the time of their execution at 90,000. The Guardian also, my understanding, was the first English language paper in the world to come out against the Israeli occupation of the West Bank. Basically, they came out against it as soon as it happened. Being based in New York,
must have been real popular.
No problem at all, right?
They lost something like 40% of their subscribers, like 20,000 subscribers. Very courageous thing for them to do. And then, like the rest of the left, they went crazy. crazy in the late 60s, became Maoists and entered all these like kind of weird factional. They went from a circulation of over 100,000 to like 15,000 and tried to like start a new communist party. All sorts of hilarious stories from that period. When I came on, there were people who had been working there since the late 60s, and one of the stories was some anarchist was a real bad word in the office, and some anarchist supporters of the Weather Underground had climbed up the fire escape, lined the windows, and had opened the windows and started pissing in the office. Like, this was all planned to get people away from the windows who were trying to like beat them back with like bats and lead pipes, and took over and occupied the office. And someone had the sense to grab the subscription files on the way out the door. But for about a year, there were two dueling guardians. There was the regular guardian and the liberated. I don't know if folks are familiar with the Revolutionary Communist Party.
I've heard it mentioned. Did you ever? And I still need to read I think Zero Books put out at least one book on him. And did you ever read Revolution in the Air by I think Max Elbaum? Yep.
I've read parts of it. It's the best account of all this craziness in the 70s, and you'll hear people who went through all the craziness say that. RCP comes out of the splits within SDS. SDS, Students for a Democratic Society, the kind of the storied student activist organization.
The movement, yeah.
Yeah, gets taken over by Maoists. It then splits into RIM 1, RIM 2, Revolutionary Youth Movement 1 and 2. And 2 becomes the nucleus for Revolutionary Communist Party, which Bob Avakian he's the cult leader.
That's where he enters the scene.
Yeah. So the RCP is a bona fide cult of personality. They also tried to take over the Guardian offices, and where I worked, it was the same exact offices, and we were on like the 14th floor. And what happened was they pack, like 20 of them pack into this elevator meant to hold about half that many.
Oh boy.
They come up to the 14th floor, and that it opens up to the business office, and it opens up, and they're so packed in there no one can come out. And people in the business office are just kind of like looking at them as the doors open for a few seconds, and then the door closes, and because they had packed so many people in there, it was so overweight, it just starts to go down and plummets and goes right into the basement, and they have to be rescued by the fire department. This is the left.
Pretty great.
Dun 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 dun.
Well, that was very popular back then, wasn't it? I mean, they were always trying to like see how many people they could fit into a phone booth. Or
exactly.
How many people they could fit into a VW Bug. Like this was.
Well, you sit on top of a flagpole for as long as you can, swallow a live goldfish. Yeah, it was just fun. It was just good kid fun.
Dance the Lindy until you die.
I was gonna say, I think we're mixing early seasons of Jackass with the Flappers here. So you were working there right at Pre-Giuliani era, right?
I started briefly before him. I mean, are we going to get into some old stories, some old-timey stories? You know what? New York was... Am I allowed to cuss?
Sir, we require it.
New York was fucking awesome before Giuliani. I mean, don't get me wrong, it had its problems, but this is, I live in the Lower East Side. This is kind of the real storied radical neighborhood. It's where Emma Goldman used to live. Leon Trotsky, I think, spent some time there. And it, when I moved there in the early 90s, it was still this hotbed of radicalism there. And the thing about it, there was a much different policy towards drugs in those days. I mean, it wasn't the neighborhood could be pretty scary. It was an open air heroin market, essentially.
That always helps, yeah.
Yeah, people, you'd see them shooting up right on curbs, passed out. There were blocks that were no go. The only reason, as a friend of mine who's became a junkie put it, the only reason you go down this block, 7th Street, between Avenues B and C, is if you want to score heroin or you want to get mugged.
Right, yeah. And my only knowledge of that era is either through movies or the very first season of The Real World.
Could you get the phone?
Right. And this is, I like to make this distinction between like public culture and private culture. I was just in Paris this past summer doing some research for my food book, and I didn't realize, open air drinking is allowed. It's completely allowed.
Like in Mobile or New Orleans.
Yeah. And so my girlfriend and I were staying near this one, Quay, I think it's pronounced. I don't know. My French pronunciation is terrible.
I only know Spanish, not French.
In any case, every night it would just be lined with small groups of people with bottles of wine and booze, and they would just hang out and have a good time. And that's what New York East Village used to be like. You could just hang out on the street, drink booze, smoke pot, and the cops wouldn't bother you. I remember once walking down the street, passing a joint with some friends, and this cop car slows down. A cop sticks his head out the window and just goes, "Don't pass that joint, don't pass that joint," and they speed up and go away. So
that sounds pretty great.
Yeah,
a much different era.
Right. And so under Giuliani, the whole thing was, it was, of course, back then there was actually a dog whistle, right, instead of the racist bullhorn that we have now. And so Giuliani is like, quality of life. We're going to go after the squeegee men, the pot smokers, the bicyclists. Right. This is the biggest problem New York City has when
the vermin.
Yeah. When meanwhile there's over 2,000 people dying a year in the crack wars in the Latino and African American neighborhoods. So arrests of marijuana possession increased something like 1,000% within a couple of years under Giuliani. And so what it does is, at the same time, the gentrification that really started to happen under his predecessor Dinkins. That's
right.
So that public culture, we would just sit on the street. People would play music. No one would bother you. There was this one of the few bars near me. They would have these dance parties in the bar every Friday night on First and First, and they would spill into the street.
People just dancing in the street.
There'd be 100 to 200 people at 3 a.m. dancing in the street, right in the intersection.
Far out.
Yeah, and so this, I've been visiting Portland, occasionally for the last decade, and so it's almost like time-lapse photography, and I think this is what gentrification does, right? It kind of takes this public life and privatizes it. It's a form of enclosure.
Yeah.
Right.
So,
awesome.
This is around the time when the Bonfire of the Vanities happened, right?
I think that's a decade earlier.
Okay.
Before my time. But you know what? Maybe you're right, because it does. I think parody Sharpton as one of the characters, right? So it's a few years before me. Felt like a different. When you're young, 3 or 4 years feels like a different era.
How did you wind up going from doing journal to cooking?
So when I joined The Guardian, it was on its last legs. Here's a quick story. And I didn't know that when they hired me. But right after they hired me, there'd been this guy. He had died before I got there. Who he had worked at The Guardian since its founding. He had never drawn a paycheck. His name was Fred Hart. He paid the rent of The Guardian every month. And I think the reason his story is important because it shows, as much as you want to say about the Communist Party, I think the left used to be a lot more intelligent. The Communist Party used to encourage its members to go into business. And it didn't have this kind of like puerile and puritanical hatred of money. It understood that it was still a tool. So Fred Hart started a grocery store, and over time he built it into like I think 4 grocery stores on Long Island. When he died, he left his entire estate to left-wing organizations, and this is like I think 91 or something. And he left the Guardian $600,000. That'd probably be about $2 million.
Holy shit.
And so that kept us limping along for a couple of years.
So the grocery stores were for profit?
Yeah, they were for profit, but the Guardian never paid rent because he was paying their commercial rent.
Not bad.
For 40 years. And he left them with enough money they should have been able to buy a building, but they squandered it. In any case, so after that, it's just I kind of got, it was like to go down with a sinking ship is it's not an easy experience. And so I kind of got burnt out on politics. I ended up, I know also the 90s were a time where things really seemed pretty depoliticized.
Yeah,
yes.
I think that's one of the things we've talked about it on the earlier episodes too. But I showed up on I showed up in Ann Arbor on campus in '94, and like mid-'90s politics was full in effect.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, there was the Zapatistas. I'd cut my teeth on.
Sorry, Jeremy. Were you saying affect? Like it was just when you say full on, or were you saying full effect? Like
in full effect, yes.
Yeah, but how would you describe '90s politics?
Bill Hicks.
Your political education came on the back of a peace pop.
Mm-hmm. Or you had Rage Against the Machine records or something.
Some of those that work forces are the same that burn crosses. Some of those that work forces draw the same that burn crosses. Killing in the name of.
That was what being a leftist was owning at least 2 Rage Against the Machine.
Well, it was like stuff like United Students Against Sweatshops.
I remember the sit-ins in Ann Arbor.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was pretty young during most of the 90s, so I was not politically aware. So yeah, I don't.
Yeah,
really know.
my initial political education came because somehow my conservative parents subscribed to Newsweek, and I started reading it during the Gulf War, and then eventually, slowly got more and more. And a buddy of mine wound up working for Senator Don Regal, and one of these days I got to tell the story of election night in '92, of going to the UAW headquarters in Flint to watch the election night results and like the Clinton victory parades.
You grew up with like unions and stuff. I just grew up with nothing.
I grew up afterwards. There's a reason why Roger
dying unions, but
Roger and me was set in my town for a reason.
Yeah, no shit.
I'm from Flint.
Oh please! I'm an immigrant. I grew up in an immigrant household that was completely depoliticized.
Yeah, I go along to get along, that sort of thing.
Yeah, just expected that I would, like I have to explain. School for me was strange because when I found out other kids in my high school class were not going to college, that was a shock to me. Like. In my family and all our relatives in the kind of South Asian community in general, like going to college was no big deal, and that was assumed. And in fact, the assumption was like, what advanced degree are you going to get? Of course, you're going to get some sort of advanced degree, whether in engineering or math or doctor or science, etc. So that was the type of culture I came up in. But in that case, Bobo's in Paradise, right? That was the famous '90s book.
David Brooks, isn't it?
Yep.
Oh yeah, I think it's kind of how he if not how he really first showed up, at least I think it was like real big splash that.
I think in a pop sense, that was what broke him. Yeah. Fuck that guy. I hate him so much.
The only semi-intelligent idea he ever had
was in that book.
Yeah.
Bourgeois bohemians.
Yeah. I mean, there definitely is. But the much more intelligent version of that would have been the Baffler, right? That's when the Baffler really came to prominence, or it might have even been founded.
I think Thomas Franks founded it in like the early mid-90s and started going from there. And
Yeah, so I worked in advertising, doing copy editing and a little copywriting, and paid well, but it was fucking boring, and I would spend a lot of my day getting stoned at work, and I decided I wanted to do something more meaningful, and I love cooking, so I went to culinary school and got trained in classical French cuisine and at the French Culinary Institute in New York City, and cooked for about a year or so. Even before I graduated, I realized it wasn't for me. Cooking is very mentally and physically challenging, and I do like that, but it wasn't the particular mental stimulation I was looking for, and it was kind of the thing I had to kind of get out of journalism to realize that it's my true love. And what brought me back into it was Seattle, WTO, because that was the first thing that gave me
that was the first big thing. And I just moved to Portland maybe 6 months before, where I was like, this is some real shit and I'm excited and I want to go. I didn't go. I didn't have any money.
No, I just remember hearing about it. I remember hearing about it back in just through sporadic channels back in Ann Arbor. But it's just funny that you mentioned that this is now like even our guest Derek Varner, who was on our the last episode that Jacob and I recorded with him. He lives in Salt Lake and calls in. He talked about how his like political awakening was when he was 18 was motoring getting from Georgia up to Seattle to go there.
Yeah.
Well, and the timing on that is interesting, too, because it's 99, so, it sort of serves as a emblematic sea change of, but even before that, I certainly had political opinions back then, but there was never really a sense of urgency. There was never really a sense of, oh, no, oh, shit, we have to do something that, I've read about happening in the 60s and to a lesser extent in some groups in the 70s, and the sort of sensation that I'm feeling now. And particularly with the 90s, there were things like Waco, and there were certainly some very radicalized people in the Oklahoma City bombing being a good example of that.
But it was all right-wing radicalism for that.
Well, and I think it was pretty isolated. I think for the most part, the population felt, things are going okay. I have a house, I have a job. Our president's kind of awful, but,
Yeah.
And he's awful in a easy to tolerate way, so we can just, go
Well,
along.
and like GDP growth was really big, and everyone was still buying the sort of bullshit idea that if the economy's doing well, you're doing well, and
new economy.
Yeah, and all that shit,
We were living in the end of history, so it was all good.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Watching the world wake up from history.
I mean, I got pretty radicalized, but it was a very academic radicalization. I read Chomsky, and I read the disinfo books, Everything You Know Is Wrong, and all these alternative conspiratorial ideas, and I was like, wow, that's really messed up, and then I would just go about my day.
Yeah.
Like, these things were interesting, but they weren't necessarily driving me to action.
Well, it felt like just reading about something leftist was doing something, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, just to hit on that theme about how much things can change within a few years, what's today the anniversary of?
I need to buy my folks a card.
Oh, the French Commune?
Maybe, but the Iraq War.
That too.
Oh, that's right. I saw a funny tweet about that.
15 years ago.
It's almost old enough to enlist to fight in Iraq.
Yeah.
The invasion of Iraq.
Yep. With permission from its parents, it probably could. Don't want to be a bummer, but since, you were radicalized during the Gulf War, and I helped to coordinate our coverage for that lovely.
I wouldn't even say I was radicalized. I think I would just barely like came around to like just basic suburban white kid democratic politics. My radicalization was a good shit, I don't know. Like it didn't really happen until like between I think initially like say 2004 and then 2016 for good. So
it's 2009 for me was when I started taking marks. That was the big thing where I started thinking about marks seriously.
There's another point of comparison you can draw there between the first and second Iraq wars. The first 90s one being sort of, it was light, it was easy, we got in, we got out, we lost a few people, not that big a deal, as opposed to the long grind that we're still in today.
Well, in the way that the first Gulf War wove into the cable news was such a bizarre, now we just take it for granted, but that was a whole new thing. It was like having a marketing team for your war.
Well, yeah, I mean, it of course keeps up. If Vietnam was the first television war, and then the Iraq War was kind of the first cable, maybe digital war. Certainly the second Iraq War was the first internet war.
Right.
I remember. I had a lot of friends who went and to Iraq and reported from there, and I was seriously considering it. And then by really 2004, April 2004, that's when you had the two uprisings, the Sunni uprising and the Shia uprising. I was like, okay, I don't think I'm going to be going to Iraq.
Yeah,
and the hotel bombing was around that time, as I recall.
Which one?
Well, there was one where they actually managed to hit a hotel that was occupied by journalists mostly.
Yep, I remember that.
The U.S., you mean, or the guerrillas?
The guerrillas. But there was a point where basically it kind of felt like things were maybe improving, and then there was just that turn where we realized that this was going to keep happening and this was going to get really bad.
Right.
yeah.
Were your friends embedded, or were they?
No.
Okay.
I mean, I'm talking people like Dar Jamal, Jeremy Scahill, Christian Perenni, Aaron Glantz.
I mean, the reason I ask is I just didn't know if that embedding was one of the most kind of gross things about that war, and I didn't know if you could get in. I mean, if without being an embedded journalist, you know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, it wasn't if you had the money, you could just show up there, and it was pretty dicey.
Right, you had to get some guy to put you in a pickup.
Yeah.
Okay, so Battle of Seattle, the WTO in '99 was kind of like what re-energized you or got you?
Yeah. It gave me hope, and that is a really, I think, extremely important aspect about any politics. I really find the whole accelerationism, or what I often see accelerationism light, to be just really stupid is, I think, the simplest way to put it. I've been wanting to write a little something about the left's response to these teachers, the West Virginia teacher strike and potentially the other ones. No criticisms of the strikes themselves, but in terms of there is kind of this almost accelerationism light. I've done a lot of labor reporting over the last 5 years, but so Janus is of course going to come down. The thing is, and I hear people say who really don't know that much about how unions operate, but who are all about the working class, there's going to be a silver lining, various silver linings, and just I
read a piece to that effect.
Yeah, really. I mean, we've already have a pretty vivid test case. You notice what's gone on in Wisconsin? Unions have been decimated there, and the thing is also what's going on is people are kind of these teacher actions. They're not all happening in kind of the worst off states, but that's where they seem to be concentrated, right? Kentucky, Oklahoma, Arizona, the ones where the the most anti-union. The workforces tend to be the most feminized, and the teachers are basically almost on poverty wages. So, I mean, is that the solution, that we just need to like drive the kind of the working class to ruin before they're going to revolt?
But okay, so I'm sorry, I'm not understanding what your criticism is with regard to what did you call it? Acceleration light?
Accelerationism light. That this is going to be the herald some new wave of like labor activity. It's a way that the left like leaps on to anything and thinks it's the next big thing that's going to change everything.
Okay. Right. What's your skepticism?
Because first of all, when people are parachuting into, they don't understand, and it's like I said, it's because I've been doing labor reporting, that you have to really understand the particularities of the community, of that particular workforce, of the culture of the region that they're organizing in, the laws. And you have to understand how that all works together, because there are also limits. Like, labor struggles under the NLRB are limited struggles, even the best of them. You know, even when we point to the Chicago Teachers Union, I mean, they're hamstrung in a lot of ways. And, you know, like, Rahm Emanuel has been decimating the public schools, and you know what Rauner is also doing with the pensions and education funding, the governor of Illinois. Mm-hmm. And this is about a long-term political struggle. But there's also limits to what they are able to agitate around. What CTU did in Chicago was they showed by law, you're only supposed to, you can only bring in issues related to contract negotiations. What's CTU's innovation was that they brought in issues related to the actual students as part of the workplace issues.
But to sort of counterpose against that, it's like, from what I understand, and I have no particular expertise, the West Virginia strike was technically illegal, and it was still effective as a movement. So if I feel like I understand your argument against it,
I'm not criticizing the strike. I'm talking about the response,
the popular embrace. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, as I haven't really kept up on the response. I'm aware of the strike, and I've been following news stories about that. But as I understand the definition of accelerationism, as somebody who has no idea generally what's happening or what people are talking about, my understanding was that accelerationism was just hoping that things get worse in order to heighten the contradictions. So it's actually cool that Trump is president, and that sort of thinking. Mm-hmm. So I'm not entirely clear on how it applies here.
Well, Janice is coming down the pike, which is going to basically decimate.
Do you know Janice?
No. Who's Janice?
Janice was the guitar player, the hippie like guitar player with Floyd and Zoot, and was a member of Dr. Teeth.
Oh, wow, Kermit, like I really don't believe this weird trip you're putting us on.
What's that, Janice?
Oh, the band and I just flashed on the closing number.
The band just flashed?
I mean, you know, Kermit, sometimes I just don't know what space you're coming from.
Well, it's just sort of a regular backstage space.
Really, Kermit, you don't expect us to do the jousting number from Camelot?
Any word, yes.
Ew.
This is gibberish. Are you having a stroke? What's going on?
Jacob, of
I
course,
told him
being
not to use pop cultural references beyond Jackass, and look, he goes.
Jacob, of course, being the youngest member here.
So Janice is this Supreme Court case that was just heard. It's going to bring essentially right to work to public sector unions nationwide.
It's probably going to destroy public sector unions.
So that is where unionization is heavily concentrated. Private sector unionism has basically all but disappeared. It's, I think, down to about 7%.
Yep.
Public sector, I think, still might be around 30%.
Yeah, that's what I heard, about a third.
Yeah, much, much higher. And it's been this very concerted right-wing strategy that's been going on for 50 years, and this is the culmination of it. Basically, what it does is it allows free riders. So people can still be covered by the contract, but they don't have to pay the union dues anymore. And so you hear a lot of arguments from people that, oh, well, now unions are going to have to go back to like class struggle unionism or militant unionism or social unionism.
Wildcat strikes, yeah.
And I'm not, so apparently West Virginia, because I've been in contact with one of the kind of best people on this, Lois Weiner, I think. She said West Virginia is not a wildcat strike. Stop calling it that. She's been covering.
Okay, tell her I said sorry, and I'll stop calling her.
I will. I'll tell her you give her a personal apology and the Thin Mint on her pillow.
Well, I mean, there are actually consequences for what kind of a strike it is too, right? So
yeah, wildcat strike is where you're striking both against the bosses and your own labor leadership. So there was like this wave of wildcat strikes in the early 1970s.
Mm-hmm.
My dad, he worked as an engineer at Bethlehem Steel, and there was one point where he couldn't go to work because the steel workers were on a wildcat strike there.
Sure, but beyond that, there's actual rules about when you're allowed to strike and when you're not. So.
Well, that is done at the state level. A lot of states have these various laws. Like in New York State, it's called the Taylor Law that says it's illegal for public sector employees to strike. So when the transit workers struck about I guess 15 odd years ago,
I don't remember that.
they were. That was declared illegal. There were just massive fines. Their leadership, and they knew was going to happen. And the leadership, I think, might have been jailed for a couple of days. So that's not a federal law. So in the case of West Virginia, yes, it was illegal to strike. But this is so. The power of labor is the power to withdraw its labor. Right, that's what makes labor so powerful. As really when we talk about like creating strong social movements, that they have the ability to actually like bring relations of production to a halt. In the case of West Virginia, it's a great example of how the law is not about the law, it's about social power. So even though it was illegal, none of the counties went after any of the teachers because the teachers had so much social support from parents, from the community.
Yeah, broad base.
I've had, don't want to name check anyone, not that it really matters, but I have relatives who have been asking me since November of 2016, when is Trump going to be impeached? When is Trump going to be impeached? And I'm like, impeachment has nothing to do with the law. This is all about social power.
How do you even define what a high crime or misdemeanor is? I mean, that's essentially arbitrary. It's not.
You mean with regard to impeaching the president?
Yeah, it's not codified.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
You mentioned Sky Hill before, and I was wondering, so you've been writing on and off, or how did you get hooked up with The Intercept?
I only did one piece with them.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I know them.
Oh, okay. Well, there you go.
I know almost all their staff personally. I've written for a lot of different publications. I like to say The Nation has become the farm team for The Intercept, and so I knew all those folks. Probably about half their staff comes from The Nation originally. Jeremy Scahill, Liliana Segura, the executive editor. Betsy Reed, who I knew. I just emailed her and say, hey, I want to write for you guys regularly. And she said, sure, that sounds great. And I did one story for them, and they said I can, write regularly. But I was like, fuck, I got a book to do, as much as I would like to write for them more. I've had this book hanging over me for a few years, this food book.
Okay, well, let's transition into the food book. What do you want to do with the food book, and how was your trip to Europe to study sandwiches?
My kind of tongue-in-cheek joke was I kept saying to my girlfriend, I need a baseline, right? What my book is called Bacon as a Weapon of Mass Destruction, and it's about the social nature of taste. So what I'm trying to do is come at the politics of food in a very different way. There's thousands and thousands of books about food.
There's about 100 of them on a bookcase on the other side of that wall, too, yeah.
And, you know, and so it's hard to say something new about this subject where there's such a huge amount of writing. And I just started to realize from my own experience, and then later, like folks, some people like, oh, you need to check out Pierre Bourdieu, this French theorist who wrote this book called Distinction, where he looks at various food, fashion, vacations, but his argument is that these are all about social class, that taste is about social class. I think he goes a bit overboard with that because, you know, as someone who used to cook professionally, there are some things that just objectively taste better, and there are lots of things that just objectively taste like crap.
Is he a Marxist? What's the
He's
nature
a materialist.
of his critique?
Yeah. I mean, it's just that they become markers for social class, and you know, haute cuisine is not any better than like peasant cuisine. But the problem is, we're also talking about France, right? And so one of the most
because that sounds kind of true to me. Like there's certain aspects of. I remember when I started working, like I'm an accountant, and when before that I worked like fast food jobs basically, and then I became an accountant. Then I started working in offices, and I didn't know what the fuck to do. But everyone was talking about, like, I remember Scotch. That was when everyone was getting into Scotch, and there was fucking nothing behind it except some sort of class signaling. You know what I mean? Like they didn't. Maybe they grew to love Scotch. I don't fucking know. But
Talk about commodity fetishism.
Yeah, exactly. Like so. I don't know. That seems kind of all right to me.
Well, did fast food taste worse to you after you became an accountant?
No, I love fast food, especially Popeyes.
So I mean, and you know what? That's interesting because Popeyes might be the one exception I'm willing to make. So part of my argument is you know, I want to argue against like food shaming and body shaming, unless it's Donald Trump, of course.
Or Chris Christie.
Yep. And this is coming from 4 portly guys, you know, and portly is being kind. Maybe Zaftig, you know, Rubenesque.
Yeah, no, beer is my thing,
like
not food. Yeah, but yeah.
So look, if you like McDonald's, that's fine. I think people should not apologize for what they like, because often taste is a marker, not just for social class. It can have a lot to do with nostalgia and memory and comfort. And, you know, who knows, you know, sex and what, maybe nice. You had like, you know, you covered someone in Big Macs and ate it off them, or vice versa. And so you have this really fond, like, sexual fetish.
I had my fun in college, sure.
Yeah.
I see somebody's gotten early access to the Stormy Daniels interview.
That involved a bucket of KFC, you know.
Everybody has their own foreplay. How much of I'm curious. Why did you decide to select bacon as the titular subject, as it were? Because I'm kind of curious how much you're going into like bacon as mid-aughts, like ironic internet thing.
I love bacon. So the funny thing is that this originally began as an article, and the article began as a joke. That I just came up with the line, bacon as a weapon of mass destruction. Basically, I pulled an onion, where you come up with the headline first and you write an article from it. And so and people found it funny, and I wrote, and I ended up writing an article because I was at a party about 10 years ago where someone had bought, it was a potluck, had made bacon ice cream and bacon vodka. And I'm like, I love bacon, but this is ridiculous. And then I started researching, and there has been this huge explosion in increase in bacon consumption, and it's also something that is actually promoted. And when you start to look more and more into it, it gets more. Now, the destruction end is, you can talk about different ways. There's kind of the ecological destruction in terms of the CAFOs, the concentrated animal feeding operations, you know,
right,
where you have these like city size porcine,
manufacturing
food.
operations, processing plants.
Right, where, the biggest ones, they're producing more shit per day than Salt Lake City.
They're fucking heartbreaking and gross, but they're fucking heartbreaking.
Well, interestingly, 5 years ago, I was able to get into a CAFO in Iowa, a hog CAFO, and I was invited on a journalist contact, had relatives who ran it, and it was actually fine.
What's that word?
A CAFO, I'm not sure how it's your spell. CAFO, Concentrated Animal Feeding Operation.
Okay.
So, it's especially was used for cattle because traditionally cattle are grass fed, but it was discovered, if we take them after they feed on grass, and you can bulk up the weight, you can turn around the production time. So, but part of the industrialization of agriculture and animal husbandry, the animal itself starts to change dramatically, right? So pigs would have 1 litter a year. They're now up to 2.1 litters per year on average. The normal used to be like half a dozen, 8 to 10. Now they'll have up to 2 dozen. Because
per litter?
Yeah.
Jesus.
Now, because bacon has become so popular, the hog farmers have actually been breeding the hogs to have longer pork bellies, and an extra rib. So they're selecting. So they're actually changing the animal itself to meet the needs of the market. Now, this actually starts a lot earlier, but the whole other white meat campaign, which is total bullshit. It's just like pork is a red meat. It has to do with the compounds in the blood, right? So they were able to get away with this completely fraudulent campaign. You're only if you care, you're only supposed to have 2.5 ounces of red meat per day. That's only about 1 pound per week. I love red meat, but I try to limit it. That's just me. If you want to eat like 10 pounds, I don't care. Do whatever you like. But above about 2.5 ounces a day, you see increases in various cancers, in heart disease, and strokes, all the fun stuff, right? So bacon has all these deleterious effects on the environment, on healthcare, but from a gastronomic perspective, it does as well, because there's an actual saying in the restaurant industry. You will see it in kind of the business trade journals. When in doubt, put bacon and cheese on it.
Right.
The Whopper says, don't just go to lunch, go wild. Wow, babe! Try our new Extreme Bacon and Cheese Whopper. We went wild with 2 slices of melted Monterey Jack, 2 slices of cheddar, and 4 strips of crispy bacon, all on a 1/4 pound of plain broiled beef. Wow!
So you want any dish to bump up the flavor. It's a really simple way. A salad, any sort of vegetable, any sort of like finished meat dish. I mean, even fucking like desserts these days, you can put bacon and cheese on them. They each cost a few pennies, and you realize 10 times the amount you can charge what your input is. So it's kind of, bacon can be seen as kind of like leveling everything in its path. And I'm sure folks are familiar with like Michael Pollan's book Omnivore's Dilemma.
Yep.
So fucking hate that guy.
It's on the shelf over there.
So on this topic, when I was getting my bachelor's degree, you have to do this capstone for seniors, and I picked one called, I don't remember what it was called, local food systems or something like that, and it was. It felt like an experience in just feeling ashamed by a group of well-meaning liberals that were better people than me because I like fast food. But we read we read the Omnivore's Dilemma, and I found that guy so
sanctimonious.
He's sanctimonious, and it is the epitome of the sort of. Do you know who Peter Singer is, the Australian philosopher? The
Hell
fucking
yeah.
shitty.
I became a vegetarian for 7 years after reading, was it Animal Liberation?
Mm-hmm. And that's a good book. Don't get me wrong. Like, he's not wrong, but the point is that his his philosophy is neoliberalism. It is the, well, this is the system that's always going to exist, so we better be the best individuals we can be.
Right.
You're talking about Pollen, right?
Well, both of them actually,
Yeah.
but Peter Singer too.
Okay.
Are you a big Peter Singer fan?
I find him enjoyable. I don't necessarily subscribe to everything he says.
I think as a moral philosopher, he's not going to outlast. I think he seems like a perfectly lovely man, but as a moral philosopher, he's not going to outlast capitalism. Which that might mean nothing. Capitalism could go on forever. Who knows?
Well, I haven't read Pollen. My boss has, which makes sense.
Well,
but
Peter Singer's way better. Like I would put him over.
Well, the reason I bring up the omnivore's dilemma is because what I want to actually talk about is what I call the paradox of monotony. In other words, we have very much a monocultural diet. Humans have bred something like, estimates vary, let's use a low-end estimate, 30,000 species of plants for nutritional or caloric intake. That's species, right? So there's only one species of apple, but there are thousands of varietals of apple. Only one species of corn, but probably over 10,000. There are 7 species of wheat, 32,000 varietals. So most of what, even if you have like a meat, dairy heavy diet, still most of what you eat is plant-based. Guess how many plants account for over 90% of the American diet?
About 2.
8.
Corn and
Corn, wheat, soy, rice, sugar beets, potato, tomato, and then bounces back and forth between some fruit like either orange or banana or apple. And that's orange and apple. It's mainly just the juice that you're getting. So we actually have like an incredibly narrow diet. What we have now, you go into your average supermarket, there are 48,000 food and beverage items, distinct items. We have this incredible product differentiation, right? But they're all the same few ingredients ultimately that are formulated different ways, and everything else combined, all the spices, all the vegetable, all the produce, that's the less than 10%, and even within that, there's maybe then like a dozen other plants that probably accounts for 10%.
So it's like supermarket as Taco Bell menu,
right? And so I grew up in an Indian American household, and so I kind of had this a very dichotomous culinary upbringing. One, my mom is a fantastic cook. She had her own catering business for a while, so that's where I got my real love of food. But we were also we would eat stuff that you just don't even see it in American culture, or if you see it, it's pretty rare. We would eat okra and eggplant, but we would also eat stuff like jackfruit and bitter melon and fenugreek leaves.
What about durian?
No, that's more China, South Asia, and also durian has a very specific use. It is just as a fruit. There's not a lot of durian recipes that I'm familiar with. You get some custards, I think, but it's but in any case, and when I would go to India, there'd just be like, you're eating this incredible amount of different types of vegetables or legumes and lentils. My mom's been teaching me how to cook various stuff for years, and last year when I visited, I spent some time with them on the East Coast, and because I just wanted to learn lentils, and in her pantry she has like 20 containers full of different types of
different kinds, huh?
Yeah, and because it's one of the staples of the Indian diet, and so I'm used to eating like beans and lentils virtually every day, right? The average American eats a tablespoon and a half per month of beans or lentils.
Are you fucking kidding me?
Yeah, I've dug into all this USDA data, which is the best stuff on, and it's
a tablespoon and a half.
Yeah.
Well, you have to understand that's an average, so there isn't somebody with a tablespoon measuring that out.
This is 1
and I'm done for the month.
Well, that's 1 3/4.
Right. Well, like the whole kale as the rock star vegetable. This is basically the gastronomic 1%. I looked when the USDA, they have all these. They follow it through the whole supply chain, right? In terms of farm to retail loss, then when you bring it home, the trim, then what gets thrown out. And so when you look at actually what the kale consumption has increased, it's increased by the cooked amount, 1 tablespoon per person per year.
Well, that's good, right?
Of cooked kale a year. That's the increase.
I dated a vegan for 8 years, so I had a lot of kale and a lot of lentils.
You were probably eating, enough kale for like all of Gresham or something.
Well, Gresham. So I know and I'm way outside of my comfort zone here, things like corn, for example, there's a massive amount of lobbying and governmental shenanigans that basically create a lot of really perverse incentives. As far as bacon goes, to what extent is that happening? What is
the same exact thing happens with all these big agricultural commodities. That what it is the commodities, the subsidies go to help the huge agribusinesses. You've seen in recent decades the growth of, you now have farms that have the upper end are over $50 million a year in revenue. For a farm, that is extraordinary.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, the CAFO I went. Now the thing is, what's really kind of fascinating, the hog farm I went to in Iowa is a middle-aged couple with long roots and deep roots in Iowa. The wife, she said her ancestors had settled the town of Independence, Iowa in the early 1800s, and so they're in their 50s. And they are raising 9,000 to 10,000 hogs a year. They own a farrowing operation. That's a nursery. They didn't let me into the farrowing operation. That's what I really wanted to see. That's what's supposed to be pretty nasty, right? That's where the sows are never able to turn around. They're in these crates, and they don't want them to turn around because they will get up, turn around, and lie down and crush piglets, and that's a loss. But it was remarkable how much of farming is a turnkey operation. And it really started to click. This is why we need... Now, I've done all these road trips, starting with covering Occupy Wall Street in 2011. I've done 8 reporting road trips since then across the country, and taking all sorts of different routes. And basically, America is a giant factory. And it's a factory, it's an open-air factory producing corn and soy and wheat.
Yep.
Something like, I think of half... I just looked this up. I think it's 40% of all potentially arable land is under cultivation in the United States. And the reason that this is so important, even though farming itself is so tiny, it's something like down to 0.5% of the population. The massive amount of inputs that go into these farms, all these other industries it supports. So this couple, they have 1,200 acres. They would grow corn and soy for the hogs, and some they would sell it as well. And so I was asking them all about, the growing season and cycle. For one, it's the tractor is like all GPS controlled, right? They can. It's almost like hands off at this point,
right?
They don't as how about spraying? It's just we outsource that. We could buy a combine for $500,000, or we spend $30,000 a season to have someone come and spray. They used to haul their own shit, but now there's so many hogs, it takes 3 tanker trucks to haul it, so that's outsourced. They used to mill their own grain, but the husband said, we only had our mill only had 2 rollers. Now there's this one, at the other end of town, it has 7 rollers, and they can do it much finer. And what they're doing is that they grind it to incredible precision, to microns, because what they're trying to do is they want to maximize the nutritional intake of the hogs, but they don't want it so fine that they create a bolus in the stomach and abrade the stomach and cause ulcers. So you want to and it's down to microns.
You want to tune it precisely.
Right. So everything is outsourced. We were standing out there for hours, and the hogs would just come up to the troughs, and there's these giant, they look like 4 giant hamster feeders, each holding 6 tons of grains. Everything is computer controlled. The grain comes out, the water comes out. It's all sensors. You could basically, if you had the money, you could go to Iowa and start up a farm in a week that's completely automated.
Squat goals.
And I asked them, what's the biggest change that you've seen in your lifetime? And it's we don't know our neighbors anymore because there's so much tenant farming, and Wall Street has gotten into the business, right? Yep. So you now have these so land is just being bought and sold and rented, and people are just shifting around. And I'm pretty good at math, and they didn't know this, and I was like, oh, so how much is your land worth? And they're about $1,700 an acre. And I'm like, oh, so it's worth $2 million. And they just looked at each other and didn't say a word.
Slapped you in the face.
So I mean, they're multimillionaires, lovely people, but
yeah. So when you said earlier it's not so bad, what did you mean by that?
Well, look, I mean, I'm not going to justify the CAFOs, but this particular one, and like I said, they wouldn't let me into the farrowing operation,
which must have been
that they own that with 2 other families,
House
because
of 1,000 corpses,
and they did tell me a year or 2 earlier that they lost nearly all entire seasons worth of piglets. There was something
some disease,
50-60% mortality rate.
Monoculture die-off.
Yeah.
Cool.
There was no real smell. They have these, they're well ventilated. The hogs were clean. I mean, they look like fucking hot dogs. They are identical. Just like hot dogs with little legs and eyes. There wasn't any dead animals. I mean, they knew I was coming, but at the same time, it wasn't this.
They were like, Petey, shape up. Gertrude.
Yeah. I mean, it is an industrial scale food operation, and they do have an incentive to not wanting disease, and
I still am filled by despair with you fucking the hamster feed.
But real quick, it's just I don't know how much time we have. The 2 things I did want to talk about, if you still feel like talking to us, is one of them was on covering right-wing ops, and the other one is just thoughts on Portlanders' weird obsession and freakouts about food. At this point, whichever of the 2, if you want to do both or whatever.
We can. So I covered the Bundy occupation, the last week of it. I went down to the encampment a number of times and hung out there and interviewed a bunch of them. How
far was the drive?
Well, I flew into Portland and then drove out there, so I think it was about 300 miles. This day's drive wasn't that big of a deal.
Gotcha.
Especially if you drive across the country regularly. That was kind of, that for me really bookended 2016. That was one, and because I also covered the campaign, I did a piece about the little Hitler Youth out on Portland State University. So to see kind of this whole rise of the radical right, I mean, none of it really surprised me, because I think there's Americans just don't do history well, including the left. I mean, one of the things I kept saying is just why is anyone surprised that there is such a violent racist backlash to Obama? every time in American history there is black social and political upsurge, there is a violent white response. That happened with the slave rebellions in the antebellum period. It happened right after the Civil War with the rise of the Klan, of course, the Great Migration North, during World War I and the 1920s. This was a time, like, people don't even know this history. I think even on the left. Do any of you guys know what sundown towns are?
Oh yeah.
Yep.
What were those? Were they called green books? They were basically guides for black travelers to know.
It's the subject of the upcoming. I think Jordan Peele produced HBO series about called Lovecraft County. It revolves around a family that produces those and researches them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've always heard that within reference to like jazz musicians and stuff that they. Yeah. Anyway.
So I'm allowed to say this because I was called it regularly as a kid. So Sundown Town comes apocryphal, or maybe not, that towns would literally have signs, and I hate saying literally, but it seems to be a thing.
Close enough.
If it's literal, then
yeah.
Don't even worry about it.
Would have signs that said, "Nigger, don't be caught in this town after sundown." And so the historian James Loewen, who did the book on Sundown Town,
that was good. I couldn't remember if it was James Loewen or Dave Newart or
so he said, I think he's from Illinois. He said when he started, he expected to find a dozen or so sundown towns in Illinois. And he said at last count, it's either 500 or 1,000. Just in
Illinois.
Yeah. And so once you also start to like research the history, and it's just like it's kind of almost archaeological. Like, I mean, I only recently learned about Page, Arkansas, I think it is. Do you guys know that one?
With an I or just P-A-G-E?
I think it's P-A-I-G-E.
It's not ringing a bell.
One of the worst pogroms, and pogroms is the correct term.
Right, yeah.
In the 1920s, something like 300 African Americans killed.
Right,
Holy
yeah.
shit.
It's on par with Tulsa. I went through Tulsa about 5 years ago when two guys, one a white guy and the other part Native American, went on a killing spree, killing black people. And of course, this just totally rips open the wounds of the destruction of Black Wall Street in 1923, when including a plane from the U.S. Army Air Force flew over and dropped a bomb.
I love how that's called the Tulsa riots.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
But, 1918 or 1919 was Red Summer, where East St. Louis estimates are 100 to 200 African Americans killed. There's Rosewood, Florida,
right.
Maybe up to, and these were pogroms. And meanwhile, this has only, I think, really been starting to seep out of scholarly work in the last decade or so. Thousands of Chicanos killed in the Southwest in the early 1900s, often directly by the Texas Rangers, who were leading massacres. And of course,
also kids frequently kidnapped.
Yeah. So, this is a pretty horrific legacy that we have here. And so to see, in 2016 that, Mormonism was like an extremely, it's like white supremacy. I mean, one could say almost, I think, eugenist religion. Black people were theologically the devil until they finally changed that in like the late 1970s.
And do you remember? You ever hear the rumor of why they changed it?
BYU's basketball team.
I heard football, but yes.
Okay.
and that may be it. But the real impetus was they realized, we can grow massively in the third world, like Brazil is. That's I think what really led them to change it. Of course, like any good capitalist enterprise, it's just like here's a growth market here. Just like Coors became, Coors beer became all gay friendly when it's just like, oh shit, man, just like these dance clubs.
As an ex-Mormon, I just want to jump in here. They weren't the devil; they were just cursed. It was the Curse of Cain. So, or Curse of Ham, I think, in some of them.
Mm-hmm.
I think
Ham. There's a tie-in.
As in ham beer?
Or
Ham's beer versus the Book of Ham, or
pigs.
Hams, man, that's a bad hangover. Too many hams.
Okay,
But
so
it's been cool since '78. So
right.
we're good.
So can you explain where like Cain came back with a wife? If like him and Abel were like the only ones kicking it? Like where'd he find the ladies?
Why do you think they were the only ones kicking it?
Because Adam and Eve, you know.
Well, Adam and Eve were the first. That doesn't necessarily mean that they were the only ones.
Yeah, but there's
trust me, there's ways to explain all of this.
Okay, could you explain the two contradictory origin stories in Genesis?
I mean, I can, but if you're looking for the official theological reason,
Yeah, I was gonna say,
I can do it really quick.
I went through Presbyterian Catechism, and I forget the.
So there's one where
God did it one way and said, "I'm going to do it this other way."
yeah.
I'm God. I can do whatever. I'm going Kierkegaard on this one.
Yeah.
Don't logic it, because God can do what's impossible.
Wait, wouldn't it be more Schrodinger's cat? You know.
Well, I don't know anything about fancy science.
I mean, if you really want to get confusing with the Mormons, you just have to ask them about the archaeological records, which is basically why I lost my faith. But
About finding the tablets in a field in Elmira, you know.
And the issues with things like horses and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Are they? Is it had to do with the age of the Earth? Is that what you're talking about, or
The Book of Mormon makes specific
Stratification.
claims about basically a group of people traveling to the Americas.
right?
And it has specific claims about the history of the Americas that are not really supported by the evidence.
One being when horses got here.
Yeah, and I'm sure there's one Mormon listening to this who's super offended, and if so, feel free to email me and we can hash this out. But,
Excuse me.
well, I do have one question real quick. What do the radical right eat?
Bacon.
Well, they're meat and potatoes people, you know. Though they do have, you know, a fetish for MREs, you know. So, yeah.
Of course
Makes
they
sense.
do.
Yeah.
Of course they do. Yeah.
So delicious. Idiots.
Well, speaking of, I guess, just of like what are you? It's kind of, and this also I think kind of might connect up with your comments earlier about you not exactly holding the modern left in the highest esteem. Can you talk about, if you would, just like thoughts on just like bougie ass Portland people freaking out about food?
So
lefty, not non-ideological or not, I guess, but
I've been on the left for the last 30 years, and the thing is, it's such a dismal state of affairs, and I think the left loves to always. Many leftists love to blame external forces rather than like think about like, oh, maybe we might be doing something wrong. Like after Occupy Wall Street, there was this whole narrative about like, oh, the cops broke up Occupy, or even with the 60s, oh, it was like state repression, and it's just like, you know what? Every movement in the world has to deal with state repression, often. And it's not to downplay what's gone on here, but often far more horrifying than what's gone on here. And sometimes these movements are successful, like various revolutions in Latin America, Southern Africa, the Vietnamese, 2 to 3 million killed, and yet they defeated 2 empires.
Right.
technically 3 if you count the Chinese.
Well, I mean, they didn't. You're talking about the border war they had in the late 70s. I mean,
I think it was earlier than that, but anyway.
No, the Japan occupied.
Oh, Japan, yeah.
But they didn't kick them out. Like,
okay.
But Ho Chi Minh and the National Liberation Front did march in and to Hanoi after the Japanese were gone and declared independence.
Set up shop.
Yeah, and I think he read the Declaration of Independence because he was specifically trying to appeal to the United States to like, hey, don't reimpose the colonial, colonial administration. So in any case, so this is coming from a place where I've been on the left, and I've spent time in like over 50 cities in the past decade, and Portland has some unusual politics. So I'll explain this in kind of a broader way, and then we can talk about the specifics. So,
Sure.
What I realized about Portland, and I was joking with a friend, not really joking. Portland has this white guilt spectrum disorder because there's variants. There's liberal white guilt. There's kind of like progressive and radical white guilt, and there's revolutionary white guilt. They all take their own forms. So, but the thing about the American left is it has very little, and by left, my definition of left is you have to be anti-capitalist. It's not enough to be like, of course there are other things that are necessary, like being a feminist, being like a supporter of organized labor, being anti-racist, but in and of themselves it's not enough, because with Hillary Clinton we get neoliberal and imperial feminism, when you silo an identity, as important as I think the politics of identity can be, it becomes identitarianism.
Right.
And that's an important distinction. We don't want to throw, the baby out with the bathwater. So, but being anti-capitalist, I think, and the organized anti-capitalist left is pretty small. I mean, DSA has quickly become the biggest, and who knows how many of them are ultimately even anti-capitalist.
Big tenor organization. I think I'm a dues paying DSA member, as you know, but yeah.
Yeah, I guess full disclosure, I am as well. But I think it's interesting because I know a lot of people that I would call, like, I guess your sort of standard issue Democrats that at least believe they're anti-capitalism.
They may be anti-corporation, right?
Yeah.
So look, most you can be in some cadre organization, and I think there are cadre organizations out there that are doing genuinely good work. And even if you're like going to 10 hours of meetings a week, that means over 90% of your life is still structured by capitalist forces. Everything you do from the moment you wake up to your sleeping hours is about these are all products of some sort of corporation. You're probably working directly or indirectly for some corporation. You're certainly a wage labor unless you're a trustafarian, and then that's not a strategy, and that's probably going to be problematic if you're a trustafarian. Your communications are done through shit like Facebook and Twitter and what's
Google too.
Yeah, I mean. So it's like your life is structured by market forces, if we talk about social relations, that also creates. No matter how much you think of yourself as a revolutionary, that still creates a lot of that warps the social relations between you and other members in that organization, and that's very few people who are in like quote unquote like probably not even 10,000 are actually in organized revolutionary anti-capitalist outfits. DSA has what, like 30,000 members now. I mean,
35 plus, yeah.
Yeah. The thing is, and this is a little bit of a let's say critique rather than criticism. It's charismatic based leadership, right? It's not a cadre based leadership is going to be much tighter, much more disciplined, and my feeling is that's where DSA needs to move more towards cadre base rather than charismatic, because we see what happens with kind of the worst of charismatic leadership in Portland, with that intersection of white guilt, charismatic people, and social media. And so what happens is it allows people to jump on an event. Now, this isn't a criticism of Portland's resistance at all. I know many people who do have critiques of Portland's resistance, but it is a truth that a couple of people responded to the election of Trump, put up a web page quickly, called for protests quickly, And they then become the spokespeople for the resistance. They're being called by the BBC and the New York Times and being profiled. And yet, where is the accountability? Who said, like, hey, you should be the leadership of the anti-Trump movement?
Right, yeah, they were just there first.
Right. And so you're basically able to commodify and capitalize on it, even if you have the best of intentions. Like I said, I'm just describing a phenomena that exists. Now, then you get people, and I'm not going to name names, but other people who may not have the best of intentions. And, you know, you especially see this around these, like, bizarre, like, food policing in Portland. You know, there was the attack on the two women who opened a burrito cart, you know, because they wrote this, like, tone deaf, or there was this interview that was pretty tone deaf, where they were talking about, like, being in Baja California, and, you know, and just, like, whatever. It's not the end of the world if these two white girls are, like, making burritos. The irony of it, though, is they were renting from this other guy, a person of color who had a burrito truck. So by shutting their, like, weekend burrito cart down, he lost business, right?
And the cart is no longer where it was.
Right.
I don't know if he's out of business. I just know that the cart ain't there anymore, because I know where the cart used to be.
Right. So, okay, so, you know, or recently now, like, there's someone who's attacking this Russian restaurant because some guy came in with this shirt that said Luftwaffe that may have been, all Luftwaffe means is Air Force, but it had an eagle on it, which is no longer part of it. You know, the German Air Force is now currently called Luftwaffe, right? Like Lufthansa, right? So, it had an eagle on it, so it may have been like an alt-right, you know, pro-Nazi thing, but having worked in restaurants for a couple of years, it's just like, I'm sorry, you know, if you're running a restaurant, you've got better things to do than, like, police what people are, what t-shirts they're wearing. But the person who jumped on it, you know, this is typical. They put it on social media. It went viral. They're calling for a boycott. Meanwhile, this, like, the restaurant and the chef, it's like refugees and people of color, and one of the owners' family was killed in the Holocaust. And it's just like, really? Are you serious? You know, you're trying to shut them down because there was some dude who may or may not have been an asshole in the restaurant who they have no responsibility for. It's a lot of moralizing, you know, that it's easy to do. And I think this is kind of typical of the American left. So is that the t-shirt he wore, or is that one that is the current Luftwaffe?
This is being claimed to be the shirt that was worn.
Yeah, I mean, that is not the Nazi eagle. It does have an eagle, but it's not that kind of classic, you know,
Gothic-looking. Yeah, I can't remember the name of it, but yeah,
it almost looks more
eagles or something.
More American eagle, you know.
Yeah.
Flying free, you know, like, you know, but speaking of, like, you know, it's just like, hey, what if they're wearing, like, you know, some sort of Desert Storm t-shirt? I mean, we have killed over 1 million Iraqi people, you know, people who just, you know, made the wrong choice to be born in Iraq, you know.
What you're saying is that it was a good idea to attack this person, but just because it said Air Force, not necessarily because of the Nazi association. I can get behind that.
What I was saying, thank you very much, it was good to attack him because he was white.
Yeah,
I'm on board for that.
Yeah.
We've had it too good for too long.
I know.
Well, I mean, we're half of this room, so we're on our way.
Yeah.
I noticed that you criticize capitalism, but you're using a phone.
Boom, got it.
No, shit. I know. I mean, you should. I think you should do a big expose about me.
Yeah.
So this is me and Ryan Bundy.
Nice.
Oh shit!
It's sitting in the cab of his pickup truck. I got it 2-hour lecture on the Constitution.
Did you tape it or just kind of like sit there and make little notes?
Did he even say, "You're all right"?
I taped it. And so, can you see what's in the coffee holder?
Are those two semi-automatics?
Magazines.
Oh, they're magazines. Okay.
Don't call them clips.
Yep. Loaded of. He's like. I'm guessing
they're Glocks.
No, it's for a semi-automatic.
That's just so disgusting to me. Why wouldn't you have like a special compartment for magazines? Like, this is something that Ford and those other companies really need to jump on.
Yeah, gross.
It just doesn't fit.
No,
it's because they hate America.
Yeah, it's more something they leave for the aftermarket crowd.
There's a pretty strong sovereign citizen contingent with those guys, right?
Well, it was
definitely crossover.
Yeah. There was some. I mean, it kind of. It attracted all the lunatics. I mean, the thing was, at the occupation itself, they were being very selective about who they were letting in, but they knew they were good about using the media, so they would let the media in because they knew that was kind of was really important.
Signal
in
boost.
the town of Burns, and there's some other small town that's part of it. It's one of these two conjoined tiny towns.
Yeah.
It was filled with all these other freelance operators, all these militiamen, and just people there was one night I just went to a bar and I met these two guys. There's one guy, the voice of Idaho or something like that. So there's this whole ecology of right-wing grassroots media, and as someone who was involved in indie media,
and a lot of it in the Northwest as well.
Yeah, this is really bizarre. And these guys, it was him and some African American kid. Even though the African American guy was I think around 30 years old, he acted like he was about 14 years old. Was his cameraman. And it was just it's what would they were explaining to me, and the kid was explaining to me at one point, about how you shouldn't eat GMOs because they interact with the fluoride and the chemtrails and cause the neurological changes. So he was really big into clean eating. And
that's what my research shows.
Yeah. And that actually, if Portland had a parliamentary system, I think that would get at least one city council seat.
Minority party, yeah.
Yeah, the chemtrail fluoride GMO party. It actually, that could vie for majority power,
Well, what about instead of political ideologies, it is just what diet you're into, and then that's how we arrange politics. Let's just try it for 20 years and just see what happens.
But anyways, just so we sound about
keto.
You really are what you eat.
Yeah. Aaron, we want to thank you again a lot for taking the time to come out here and tell us all your stories and put up with our bullshit and our what I like to call our show Less Than Structured. Do you have anything you would like to promote, or anything upcoming, or even anything you would like to recommend that folks check out?
What's a food you think everybody should eat?
What is a food I think everyone should eat? None.
Mm-hmm.
I will say, if you cook Indian food, and you were not raised in that culture,
stop.
You may like it and be proud of it, and that's perfectly fine, but don't invite me over for dinner.
Fair enough.
Damn. Shots fired.
Bollywood Cafe sucks, in my opinion. They're
I haven't been there, no.
Yeah, I mean, people keep telling me, "Oh, you need to go to Bollywood. You need to go to Bollywood." And
why would they tell you that?
Well, because I'm an Indian. I mean, it's just like I go around wearing a giant diaper like Gandhi, and so and I say, "Where's the curry?" Yeah.
Yeah.
Was TP USA culturally appropriating when they pulled the diaper stunt? I'll have to think about that.
Oh, what was that?
That might be too online.
Let's put a pin on that.
That might be too online, but
Turning Point USA.
Yeah, the Kent State thing.
Okay, I didn't.
Kent State Redux.
Okay. I have a book coming out. Next year or the year after. Bacon as a Weapon of Mass Destruction. The new press. I will come through Portland, and it'll be fun.
Cool. Let's come back on. Yeah.
And I'm speaking at some conference. I think Corvallis is what you told me.
Correct.
Yes, I have your schedule here, sir.
Yeah,
and it says Corvallis.
Yeah,
that's on.
Which is embarrassing because they've invited me to speak there before. I just get all the universities out here.
It's a cute.
I was like, is it the one in
town.
Eugene? Because I spoke in there as well. April 7th. I'm talking about. I think the title is something about police property and Protestantism, and so kind of explaining why the right is so powerful and the left is so weak, and understanding how what the left needs to do historically to get out of its really precarious state. And the most important thing you can do on the left is attack people on social media for not using the perfect language
Done.
or symbols that you have approved. Have you seen this stuff like people going after the pussy hats?
Yes, I have a little bit.
Because not all women have pussies, and not all pussies are pink. And I'm like, it's a symbol, right? It's not an actual vagina.
I'm an ally, and one day I'll be the most beautiful ally at the ally bar.
I'm trying to get you guys boycotted, because it'll give you audience in the hundreds.
That's his job. Also, if you want to mention anything about the Portland people, was it Portland People's Coalition or Congress?
Communists, Portland People's Coalition.
That's a coalition.
Yes, April 14th, upcoming is a convention where we are going to be ratifying a Bill of Rights and a platform of policies. This is kind of a very exciting project that's been going on since the election of our Führer back so long ago, trying to create actually grassroots meaningful social power in Portland. There's a lot of great organizing that goes on here, and so folks have been trying to pull together something more broad that can actually intervene in electoral politics while not falling into the trap of electoralism. And so that's going to happen April 14th at SEIU 503, I think.
The bigger one or the smaller one?
The one on Foster?
Yeah. The
503, Foster in 62nd, I think.
Yeah. But essentially it's going to pass this kind of very brief Bill of Rights, right to housing, right to education, and from that derive policy positions. This is we're using the group is using the Richmond Progressive Alliance as the model in Richmond, California, which went from 7 people in a room in 2004, where they now have a majority on the city council as well as the mayorship. One of the things they passed back over a decade ago was rent control, and they finally won it after a decade. So it shows, and there are other examples Jackson, Mississippi, Barcelona, and Camus. There's also other various progressive alliances that have sprung up in the wake of Richmond. So it's a way to try and create meaningful change at the local level.
Sweet. Trying to think of anything you've been watching, reading, or listening to you would recommend folks check out. Who have you been reading that really kind of just blew your mind?
Well, I've been reading food book after food book. I'm not. I think Jane McAlevey stuff is really good.
Yep, she's always fun. Her interviews are always great.
Yeah. Really excellent thinker in terms of organizing. People who I regularly read, they're also great. They're real mensches. Leo Panich and Sam Gindin. If you really want to understand anything about labor, just Google up Sam Gindin's stuff. Like, he has a great piece from a couple of years ago. This is what I was talking about earlier with Janus's Supreme Court decision that's going to wreck public sector unions. This has been coming down the pike for like 5 years. And now you just finally see activists like, oh, Janus is coming down. It's just like, there was another one before there's Friedrichs, and then Scalia died. But people have known about that. The right has been trying on this warpath.
How do you spell Sam's last name?
Gindin, Gindin.
Gindin. Okay.
And they have, the two of them, their magnum opus is what the hell is it? They wrote this book a couple of years ago, something like, I think, The Political Economy of American Empire.
Okay, we'll list it in the show notes.
It is probably one of the best books you will ever read about the development of global capitalism in the 20th century. It is a bit dense if you're not familiar with the language of political economy, but it's a magisterial work in terms of explanatory depth and power. But Gindin's stuff in particular, he's someone who walks the walk. He was the chief strategist for the Canadian United Auto Workers Union for like 20 years, so he knows labor inside and out. He writes really smart, thoughtful analyses of strategy, and he had a critique about how, like, right to work can actually just exacerbate organized labor's worst tendencies. It's not going to be, crisis does not create opportunity.
Gotcha. How can folks get a hold of you if you want them to? On the web or
on the interwebs. I have a website, but I haven't really updated it in a while. My Facebook posts are public. So,
gotcha. So find you on Facebook.
Find me on the Facebook or Twitter.
All right. You guys want to go anything, or?
I got something. Speaking of political economy, I just read a book called The Passions and the Interests by Albert Hirschman. It's really early sort of arguments in defense of capitalism. I really enjoyed it. It's only about 130 pages, and it kind of shows you how there were people trying to work out different problems as capitalism was starting, and people like Montesquieu, probably the most famous name, found not rationalizations, but ideological explanations is the only word I can think of, but that's not right. Underpinnings, let's say, that helped sort of push capitalism, give it a nice kickstart. And then, based on the Malheur stuff, a book popped into my head that I read 100 years ago called Blood in the Face by James Ridgway. It's about far right movements in the United States.
James Ridgway is awesome. One of the best investigative reporters of his era.
I loved the shit out of that book. And there's a pretty good, though bad quality, documentary you can watch for free on YouTube, also called Blood in the Face. But read that Hirschman book first. It was pretty goddamn good.
Cool.
Jacob, anything?
No.
Gotcha. Real quick, I've been reading from Haymarket called a book put out about 12 years ago by Ahmed Shawki, Shawki, called Black Liberation and Socialism, which is just this excellent historical overview from, God, I think getting back even in like pre-slavery era through abolition and just the different historical eras. And man, there's a lot of it's fascinating to go back through, especially at the mid 19th century, just to read about like radical writing then, and like, wait a minute, this, a lot of to say it rhymes with today. The words echo down. And other than that, I want to thank my guests for being here tonight.
Thanks for chewing the fat with us.
Thanks for having guested me. I don't know. Can I turn that into a verb?
Sure you can.
Verbing weirds language.
Yeah. Well, yeah, chewing the fat, but I'm not getting any bread out of this.
Hi-oh!
I've been saying we should unionize, but
And
Can we go on strike?
I'm going to go on strike right now.
Wildcat?
Sure. Thank you for listening, ladies and gentlemen, to our yet another one of our extended conversations. Yeah, I'll put the contact info afterwards. Thank you. Good night. And any last words other than Jacob's joke? No. Okay.
Trump forever.
I thought you weren't an accelerationist.
No, that's a prediction.
Ah.
Can you hear yourself okay?
I can hear myself great.
Can everybody hear themselves?
Mic check 1 2. Mic check 1 2.
Ooh, you got one of those fancy little...
Pop blocker. Yeah. Got it like for $5 used from Old Town Music just down the way. But
That's Old Town.
yeah, was it Old Town or is it? Yeah, I think it's Old Town Guitars.
Yeah, it's Old Town Music.
Yeah, the one that changed.
I just wanted to reemphasize like it was an advertisement.
Gotcha.
I buy several things at Old Town Music. Most recently.
Yeah, most of
What the
yeah,
fuck did I buy most recently?
Should we have kind of our smooth radio voices on?
This is just my voice, my man. Your voice is plenty smooth.
Frankly, I'm tired of all of these goddamn liberals ruining our... No.
Yeah, I need a soundboard of like pre-recorded effects.
No, Jacob will take care of it.
Plug me in. I got it.
Can I just go all Paul Harvey and every 10 minutes say, and now you know the rest of the story.
And that little boy that nobody liked
Was Roy Cohn. Only if you do the high-low chirp of greatly differing cadence and accents. Let me get this around. So you can actually. All right.
So yeah, we can talk about the Portland People's Coalition. Just that'll take about 90 seconds.
Okay, if we can at least mention it.
Yeah.
First question: what is it?
It is a front group for the Judean People's Front.
I thought
that sounds exciting.
Yeah. He's sitting over there. Yeah.
Is that from Life of Brian?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Which I really, really think anyone who's in a left organization should have to watch that at least once a year.
I haven't seen it probably since middle school.
Yeah.
There's some good stuff, and it's kind of a thing when especially when you watch it and Holy Grail again, and realize that probably at least two of them were really maybe it's just because of when they were going through school were really exposed, or maybe just that's how Britain was in like the mid 60s and the 70s. Were really exposed to a lot of like leftist sectarian stuff.
Yeah. No, it's clear. They're all too familiar with the language of
we're a collectivist commune.
Yeah,
Trotskyist sex.
Yeah, anarcho-syndicalists. Which is that's how like a couple generations of nerdy American kids learned first heard the word anarcho-syndicalist